Okay, it's time to begin. Appreciate you being here this morning. Those who are with us online, we're happy that you have joined us. It's been a rough holiday for a lot of people, sickness and stuff like that. So we are glad to see some who've been ill back with us. That's great. If I'm a little discombobulated, we just took our grandkids back yesterday, so we're kind of recovering from that. It was fun and chaotic, challenging, wonderful. We're resuming our Isaiah. The reason I'm moving, slowly in this first part of Isaiah, because it is what we would refer to as a narrative section in Isaiah's book, in which he has the episodes in which Isaiah is speaking for God to a king, and then there will be another king that will have a opportunity to see how he does his reign, the decisions that he makes, and that will be Hezekiah. And so these two reigns of kings are set side by side. And of course, I think strategically, the way the first part of Isaiah is written through chapter 39, it is to illustrate the failure of one and the success of the other. And the question remains from the reader, it would seem, why Ahaz failed and why Hezekiah succeeded. And it has to do with their faith and trust in God. And so it's difficult not to get into the politics of the background story, because that is setting the stage for the spiritual application. Politics does not supplant spiritual guidance from God, whether one is in authority or not. If these are God's children, God's people, God's nation, whether they are engaging other nations or having to defend themselves or gather for battle, their reliance is on God, not anybody else, period. That's what faith is. That's what trust is. And as we've discussed, it's very difficult, perhaps on that level of leadership, to have that kind of trust, because you become very pragmatic in your thinking. And religion might look like something you do on Sundays, but it's really not practical and doesn't make sense in the in-between time. And that is where it does make sense. That's where faith is revealed in our own lives. We come here to get renewed so our faith will guide us next week through all of our particular engagements and businesses and decisions that we make in our actions. That's what God is calling people of faith to do, to trust him in everyday life. God's not just over here, he's in here. And so this is the lesson, or what God is trying to teach. He's been very patient with Ahaz, and he will provide, even though he knows Ahaz has already contacted Assyria, to help him against the northern Israel and also Syria. So Ahaz has actually, gone to Assyria, and he is looking to Egypt, and he wants to form these trusting covenants, alliances, which is in direct opposition to what God wants him to do. So even though God knows he is already doing that, he's going to provide him another merciful opportunity. But it's like Romans 1. in Romans 1, God says that he gave them over to their passions, the Gentiles and all of that. And we're finding that very principle in regard to Ahaz. God's going to give him over to the enemies, and God's, trying to help him, but there's at some point, the mercy of God has a point in which a decision of faith has to be made. And unfortunately, the Ahaz narrative episode is a disappointment, an extreme disappointment. So, just as a quick review, we have a couple of signs in the form of children's names that are serving as object lessons, reminders all the time. It's interesting. I think this is one of the reasons why evil persecutes goodness and truth, because as long as we're around, they're reminded that they're evil. You see what I'm saying? As long as Christians are around and people are moral and people have a sense of right and wrong, then whenever someone chooses to do wrong or they want to do wrong, then it is wrong. It's seen as wrong. And so it's a constant reminder by the church, people of faith, that what they're doing is wrong. So you need to get rid of the people that are trying to live as God would have us live. So what do? They call us names, they persecute, they try to shut us down, they do all kinds of things to silence the good. And I don't mean perfection. I'm talking about those who are wanting to please God, those in Christ and all that. Goodness doesn't mean perfection. It means a choice to do what's right, to be godly. It's not a looking down our nose at someone. It is a choice of lifestyle. If we choose that lifestyle, it's going to bring to light those who do not. See, there's a contrast. So you get rid of that which is, causing you angst, then you can do whatever you want to do without being reminded. Well, there's Ahaz, see? He's wanting to form these alliances and to, from his point of view, God can't help in the matter. And this is what's so surprising from the long history of Israel. Ahaz has come to the conclusion that the powers of Egypt and Assyria are much stronger than the powers of God. That's the irony of the whole situation. So God gives him these children that obviously he is around probably frequently. He sees. And so the first child is Shear-Yashub, the child of Isaiah, which means a remnant shall return, and that's a reminder, if you trust in me, don't worry about these enemies of yours. They're not going to be around. God's going to take care of them. You don't need to fear them. But Ahaz is scared, so every time he sees Shear-Yashub, he kind of probably walks the other way. He doesn't want to see the message, because in seeing it, he's forced again to see himself, and he wants to do something else. But the object lesson is there. Then you have the child Emmanuel, which I think there was a child named Emmanuel there that also was apparent in Isaiah's court. And every time he saw Shear-Yashub, and then there was Emmanuel, these were like large billboard signs. God's with us. A remnant shall return. There's little God's with us, and there's the little remnant shall return, And so he sees these children, and God has placed them to remind him to trust in him. God knows what he's talking about. God has a plan in place. You need to trust him. Well, in this part of Isaiah 7, beginning in 17, is God's acknowledgement that Ahaz has, already made up in his heart his decision. He may not have yet fully implemented his plans, but he's made up his mind. Okay? So, God's going to provide another merciful sign and a third child that will be another child of Isaiah. And this name is a little bit more complicated than the others. It's Mehar Shalahashbaz, which means swift is the spoil, speedy is the prey. So we'll get to what that means in just a minute. And even though this child will be in sight of Ahaz, it will not impact him, just like Shear Yeshub and Emmanuel have not impacted him to turn to God. So let's pick up Isaiah 7, verse 17. The Lord will bring on you, on your people, and on your father's house such days as have never come since the day that Ephraim separated from Judah. And who would that be? The king of Assyria is what God is raising up and what God has chosen to use as his rod of discipline against his people. God says that he is the one who's raising up the Assyrians. He is chosen, and he will talk about the glory of the Assyrians. And of course, he's saying that in regard to a perspective of a human being. If you look at Assyria, man, they're the nation to fear. Warriors, they're wealthy, they're vicious, and people are very much afraid of this power from the north, the Euphrates area. In fact, Euphrates is going to be used as a metaphor for the Assyrians. Now, what follows next are the consequences that are going to happen. Now remember, God hadn't provided the third sign yet. He's already saying to Isaiah, this is what's going to happen. Ahaz has already made his decision. And so this is sort of a prior warning, notice to everyone that these things are about to happen. So, in doing this section is structured around the phrase "in that day," which is the imminent day that the things that are being talked about are going to be fulfilled. And so this is tightly structured in this section to illustrate the consequences of the political decisions which were coming from non-faith, having lack of faith and fear, and this is what it brings upon Ahaz. Now there's a lesson in that to us as well. I wonder if the decisions we make out of fear, pragmatism, and it's sort of like what James says, we'll go to such and such city, engage in business, and make a profit. And then he says, your life is but a vapor that appears for a little while and vanishes away. You ought to say, here's the religious message. You ought to say, if what? The Lord will. See, God comes with you. If the Lord wills, we will do this and that. That's the point, I think, that we're seeing in regard to Ahaz's lack of faith. He's cutting God out of it. So this phrase is used sort of as a structural set of consequences for, the southern kingdom of Judah. He says, in that day, and notice this, this is really, I like to call it divine sarcasm. Sarcasm is a good tool. Jesus used it. The prophets used it. It is a good way to get your message across. But he says, in that day, the Lord will whistle for the fly that is in the remotest part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. So God, the picture is God whistles, and the bee comes, and the flies come, and then they establish themselves in the clefts of the rock and station themselves. He says, they will come and settle on the steep ravines and on the ledges of the cliffs, on all the thorn bushes and all of the watering places. Now, who do you suppose the fly and the bee represent? And God whistles for them. Well, it's the very ones that Ahaz is relying on. Ahaz is going, in Judah, if they don't change their direction, the very friends that they have cultivated through alliances will be the very ones to cause their destruction. So if God is the one who whistles for these insects, notice how Assyria and Egypt are viewed. They're just little insects, right? Who whistles for them? God does. So the image would seem to portray that your faith is misplaced. Wouldn't you rather be the one to side with the being who has the power to whistle for the bee and the fly? And they come. But no, you're placing your faith in these little insects. Well, these little insects are going to come and destroy your land. So let's continue reading here for a minute. In that day, the Lord will whistle for the fly that is in the remotest part of the rivers, Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. They will all come and settle on the steep ravines, ledges, and the cliffs. This is symbolism for warfare, by the way. He says, on all the thorn bushes and all the watering places, where will the Assyrians not be? See, they're going to be everywhere. It's going to be overwhelming to you. In that day, the Lord will shave with a razor hired from the regions beyond the Euphrates, that is, with the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the legs, and it will also remove the beard. Well, in our 21st century of the modern hairless male, I guess, what is it, the urban male, I think they call them? I don't know. We don't get a sense of what this is talking about. This is, they will be humiliated. It's complete humiliation. The beard represented dignity, and the hair on the male was the sign of leadership and dignity and all of this. And when God gets through shaving them with the arm of Assyria, they're going to be humiliated. Totally humiliated. And so this is probably from our culture not as understandable as it would be in the culture of Israel. So they will be betrayed by their friends, foreign alliances. They will be humiliated. God will deprive them of their dignity by shaving off their hair. And then it says, now in that day, a man may keep alive a heifer and a pair of sheep, and because of the abundance of milk produced, he will eat curds. For everyone that is left within the land will eat curds and honey. Well, what this signifies is the only thing that they have is going to be milk and honey in the land. There's nothing else. And so this is one of the reasons that this curds and honey idea, it's buttermilk or butter, whatever curds are. I've looked up various meanings of it, but that's the idea. it goes in the making of butter and buttermilk and things of that nature. And then you got honey. This is what's left in the land and all there will be. Nothing else. Nothing else at all. And so you'll be fortunate if you have a cow that can, produce milk or goat or something of that nature. And so that's all they're going to be. Well, what's he saying? Well, he's saying that they're going to be reduced to hardship. It's going to be very difficult. This is not the food of prosperity, because it's only limited to this. It's kind of like when we first got married, ramen noodles, in college, that's, you had lots of desires and appetites to do this, but, you knew because of where you were financially that, you were reduced in what you could eat. Or was it prosperity of selection? Well, that's the idea of what Isaiah is saying here, that they're being reduced to hardship and having solely, if they are even blessed with this, it's going to be difficult. Then he says, and it will come about in that day that every place where there used to be 1,000 vines, valued at 1,000 shekels of silver, will become briars and thorns. People will come where the bows and arrows, because all the land will be briars and thorns. As for all the hills which used to be cultivated with the hoe, you will not go there for fear of briars and thorns, but they will become a place for pasturing oxen and for sheep to trample. So what's he talking about? Let's say you spent 30 years cultivating a vineyard, some business. 30, 40 years. Your life has been poured into it. And it's been successful. You've been prosperous. But when the discipline comes, when the devastation comes, all of that's going to be stripped away. All of your savings, it's gone. It's like evaporated. When the market goes down, you look in your retirement stuff, it can go down quite quickly in a week if you have a plunge in the market. Where did it all go? Where did it all go? I used to have this, and now it's down here. Where'd it go? It evaporated. That's what happened. It evaporated. It just left. It's like seeing, $20 bills just evaporating. $100 bills, $1,000 bills, it's evaporating. Well, that's what's happening or going to happen to the nation of Judah and Israel. All of these, people around. And Ahaz, if he doesn't get his act together in regard to faith in God, he's responsible for bringing this because of his lack of faith. So, they will be reduced to hardship. They'll have their prosperity stripped away. All of these consequences will come because faith and obedience have been supplanted by unbelief and worldly wisdom. Now, you tell me that doesn't have modern day application. How many times do we allow worldly wisdom to guide us, or unbelief, a decision that is separate from a faith decision? You say not every decision is a faith decision. Oh, yeah, it is. If you're a child of God, all that we are is a faith decision, because we make a decision in regard to our relationship with God, do we not? So you tell me what category, so what decision you make? Does God not live in us? How can I separate anything that I am, anything that I say, any advice that I give, anything that I, purchase or decide to do, a move? How is that separated from being a Christian? Well, I understand that it's not like there's only one choice that we could make. But I know if I'm a child of God, there are choices that we do not make based upon our faith in God, right? So that may impact our work. That may impact our friends. That may impact where we go, what we do, what we say. So you tell me, what is the divide? How do you separate it? See, I don't think you can separate it because I think that's who we are, is God's people. We're children of God. Everything comes from that perspective. That's our worldview. Now, you say, well, God's not concerned about me buying an orange or an apple or a piece of candy and all that. Well, I think that's not the issue. The issue is God comes along with me at the grocery store. Do I leave him at home? Where is he? He's in me. So again, I'm saying, where do we allow God to take a nap and then we go do something without his influence or whatever? Maybe some things don't matter in regard to decisions, between a orange or banana. I'm not saying, well, God, which would you want me to have? That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is, when we are a Christian, everything we are is impacted by God. And it's seen in a lot of things. And I think in regard to our decisions that we make and all those kinds of things, God's always involved. Yeah. 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 We face decisions all the time, and there's going to be conflict sometimes as to, or challenges, we might say, and what a decision might call for us to do. I've known people who have left occupations, after they have become a Christian, or they've stopped doing a certain activity because they have started to realize, this isn't sort of aligned with God's worldview. So all that we are, all that we do is God's. And I think that's what faith is, learning to live for God, period. So maybe the statement that Paul makes in, was it 1 Thessalonians 5, when he says, 17, pray without what? Ceasing. Say, well, what does that mean? Well, I think it means we're always open heavenward. God's our partner in the matter, and so he's just in us. We are God's, and everything, as we'll see this morning, and talking more about Mary, everything is subject under the lordship of Christ. And I think it takes a while to get to that point, or for some, maybe not others, but it's a learning process of growth in faith. Then he says this. Then the Lord, we're going to a different structure. We've done the first structure, which is centered around in that day the Lord, right? So in that day, and he is describing the consequences. So just to enumerate them again, it will be a day when they will realize that their friends have betrayed them, the friends or the alliances that they have made. The nations that Ahaz relied upon will be the very ones that will bring devastation. This is also a cautionary thing in regard to making important decisions without God's involvement or guidance. We could trust in the very thing that will be our demise. That's kind of a wake-up call, almost frightening in a sense. The fly and the bee represent Egypt and Israel. The imagery is meant to show that Ahaz's trust in such small creatures reveals the absence of faith. God is the one who whistles for the fly and the bee, and they come quickly. Who's really in charge? Like I said, let's put our trust in the one who whistles for the fly and the bee. Number 2, they will be humiliated. This is represented by the shearing of the hair. They will be reduced to hardship. There won't be much food in the land. They will be stripped of prosperity. All of these consequences will come because faith and obedience, again, have been supplanted by worldly wisdom and unbelief. A believer and an unbeliever are just going to make different decisions. It's just going to be different. And the unbeliever will always look at the believer as being so impractical and loony and not making much sense in light of the current day situation. The believer will always look like that to the unbeliever. Now, as a believer, you could be embarrassed by that and say, I don't like that. Or you can lift your head high in your trust in God and see them as being so foolish. The fool has said in his heart, there's no God. Why would I trust that which comes from a position of unbelief? Now, I'm not saying that as human beings collectively, we don't have any smarts and great things that we know. I'm talking about in regard to those things of life. Belief is just different from unbelief. You can see it in science. The unbelief excludes anything related to God. Yet, there's astronomers, scientists, all kinds of people who are believers in God who have a different perspective, who have same credentials, who work in the same industry. I've always been impressed. One of our board members, I think I've told you before, is one of the head leaders of the propulsion system that's going to Mars. He's on the board of trustees at Faulkner University. Now, the guy's not dumb, is he? No. He's a believer. He's a member of the Lord's church. I don't think he's an elder. But he's working on that propulsion system. So, when you hear him talk, it's a lot different than hearing an unbelieving scientist talk. Right. Yeah, well, what can you say? It's like, talking to someone told me they didn't want to talk about the beginning. Well, that's the very thing. It's kind of like you're setting the argument. Well, why go away from the beginning? Because that is the argument. But that's the thing that's avoided. See, that's the thing I was talking about earlier. Light exposes things. They don't want to talk about the beginning. They have a pseudo explanation, in different ways. We've described it the Big Bang, but that's just. I mean, if that's the most intellectual academic thing anybody could say, it's really pitiful, because what you're saying is you still need a miracle if there's nothing there. They got to presume something's there, and then is matter eternal? They can back themselves up in a corner real easy, but that's not where they want to go. It's always other things. So this is the same thing. As long as we have people who do that, see, they don't want to deal with that, because it's the good and evil, theoretical good and evil. I'm not saying that an unbeliever is necessarily amoral or whatever, but I am saying it's a worldview. It's a presupposition, and I don't accept the presupposition you have. That's what they want us to accept, the presupposition, the premise. If I accept their premise, then yeah, there's no room for God. My faith is destroyed. Why should I accept your premise? Because you say it's the right one. I don't. So, go ahead. Yeah, I mean it's a whole thing. Yes, but in regard to this, it's the same thing concerning Ahaz. He's accepted some premise other than God, and he's getting himself in some real trouble. Now, the Lord said to me, we move from that structure, we go to the Lord talking to Isaiah now. Take for yourself a large tablet and write on it ordinary letters. Swift is the booty or spoil, and speedy is the prey. And I will take to myself faithful witnesses for testimony, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. So I approached the prophetess, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. Then the Lord said to me, name him Maher-Shalal-Hashbaz, for before the boy knows how to cry out, Daddy, Mommy, Dad, Mama. He said, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Samaria. Now we've reduced the time frame. Again, the Lord spoke to me further, saying, inasmuch as these people have rejected the gently flowing waters of Shiloh, and rejoice in Rezin and the son of Remaliah, these are, Syria, northern Israel. Now therefore, behold, the Lord is about to bring on them the strong and abundant waters of the Euphrates, even the king of Assyria, and all his glory. And it will rise up over all its channels and go over all its banks. Then it will sweep on into Judah. It will overflow and pass through it. It will reach even the neck. And the spread of its wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. This is interesting here. Two ways of looking at this, I think. There might be a double application here where the thought of the child, Emmanuel, is in mind. Okay? Like God is talking, or Isaiah is talking to the child. Or it's a distant view to Jesus, the Messiah, about the devastation that's coming on. It's kind of like, oh, Emmanuel, this is what's happening. But what we have in the immediate application is that this third child is another billboard. The tablet is likely a large sign or placard, or I like to use billboard because we're used to those on the roads, stuff. But it's for everybody to see. And it's swift the spoils, speedy the prey. And if you've seen an animal show, and you've seen a little prey running for its dear life, you got the image. Okay? The spoils, or the booty as they're called, is that which is captured by the conquering kingdom. Okay? And the speedy, the prey is running for its life. Who's chasing it? The predator. So you see a lion or a gazelle or something that's going after a prey, that's the image. So who are the spoils and the prey? It's northern Israel, Syria, and even Judah. They're running for their lives, and who's after them? It's the Assyrians. They're the predator. That's the image that's going on here, and that's what the placard is saying to Ahaz. Okay? To Ahaz, you are not the predator. You're the prey. To the king of northern Israel, you are not the predator, though you think you're going to come over to Judah and capture them. In Syria, you're not the predator either. In fact, when I whistle and I'll bring the Assyrians down, y'all going to run for your lives, because he's going to come and devastate the land. Now, he comes to the very neck of Judah. What's the neck? It's Jerusalem. This is an allusion to the next episode when we see Hezekiah is the one, after Ahaz dies, the Assyrians come even to Jerusalem, and Hezekiah takes the letter from the general and lays it out before God and prays, and what happens? God routs the Assyrians, and they go back, and the king is assassinated. Jerusalem is spared, even though the Assyrians said, I had Hezekiah caged up like a bird. You don't have anything else after that. It's the opposite response, because Hezekiah shows some light. Oh, we have a king that's actually going to make a decision from faith. But he has his downfall too. So we still need a king that's going to do the right thing, and that's ultimately going to be who? Jesus. Okay, that's it.